Aaron Burnett out front. Next on CNN.
Tonight, Ukrainian officials are accusing Israel of denying shelter to people fleeing their war-torn country because of refugee quotas. Israel is defending its policy as some Ukrainians are finding some safe harbor in Israel. CNN's Hadass Gold shares this remarkable story of an Israeli woman who welcomed 2 Ukrainian refugees and the family history that brought them together.
For hours, Katya Gusarov waited anxiously for 2 Ukrainian refugees to emerge from Tel Aviv's airport. Finally, she spots them. Alla Misiuk and her daughter Liza. It's a warm embrace, but before today, they had never met. Katya is a researcher at Jerusalem's Yad Vashem Holocaust Memorial and Museum. Alla is the great-granddaughter of a couple deemed righteous among the nations by Yad Vashem for helping save the life of a Jew during the Holocaust. That act of salvation now paid forward. Katya is hosting Alla and Liza after their terrifying journey out of Ukraine. They grow emotional, recalling the last 3 weeks, including nearly 24 hours on a train that came under fire near Kyiv.
We were told to turn off our phones and turn off the lights. So you understand how scary it all was, that even small children, 2 or 3 years old, they understood that something terrible was going on, and even they were silent. They were afraid. We lay like that for an hour and a half, each on top of each other.
Their family ripped apart by war. Liza and her mom forced to leave Dad Arthur behind. Liza, you're only 12 years old. Do you feel like you've grown up very quickly in the last few weeks?
Я, может, на взгляд и не поменялась, но...
I may look the same on the outside, but my character has changed because I'm ready for war at all times. The siren starts to go off, and you realize that your life is in danger. You realize that you may never see your family again. That's what changed my character.
Inside Katya's home, a chance to look over why Alla and Liza ended up in Israel. More than 80 years ago in 1941, Alla's great-grandparents, Ivan and Tatiana Paramount, saved the life of a young Jewish man and Soviet soldier named Viktor Rudnik. Documents detail how they sheltered Rudnik after he escaped from a prisoner of war camp. At one point, risking their own lives by pretending Rudnik was their own son, even while they were forced to host German soldiers in the same house. A letter in the file, written by Ivan Paramount, describes how their town near Kharkiv was bombed in 1943. The similarities, down to the dates, haunting.
The damn Germans bombed us from March 2nd to March 19th, every day from morning to evening. For 3 days, we were hiding in our cellar. On March 5th, a bomb hit our barn.
Alla grows emotional over the parallels to what the Russian army is doing now.
They just destroy them deliberately, destroy them ruthlessly, because it's genocide. It's just genocide of the Ukrainian people.
Katya and Alla's bond started when Alla reached out to the museum a year ago via email, simply seeking more information about her family. Then the war started, and Alla wrote again, asking for help. And after days traveling by train, car, and on foot, they made it to Poland and soon onto the plane to Tel Aviv. For now, Alla and Liza say they feel safe, taken in by Katya's family like Alla's did for Viktor so many years ago.
This bond of helping people, it's just normal, it should be. Because if you do a good thing, it will be back to you in one way or another.
Hadass Gold, CNN, Modi'in, Israel.
Thank you, Hadass, for that report. Aaron Burnett out front starts right now.
Out front next, a rising civilian death toll in Ukraine tonight. Among the dead, an American gunned down by Russian snipers as he waited in a bread line. I'll speak with his sister. Plus, we'll go inside Vladimir Putin's inner circle tonight. The ex of an oligarch once dubbed Putin's banker. tells me what she witnessed firsthand, like The Godfather, she says. And the most innocent victims, we're going to take you to a hospital stretched to the limits, caring for the very, very youngest Ukrainians. Let's go out front. And good evening, I'm Erin Burnett. Out front tonight, the breaking news. Intensifying indiscriminate attacks by Russia in Ukraine. This is according to the mayor of the northern Ukrainian city of Chernihiv tonight. Police there say more civilians were killed by Russian artillery fire today. And officials tonight say more than 50 people were brought to the city morgue Wednesday. Among the dead, an American, James Whitney Hill. He lived in Ukraine with his partner who was suffering from MS. And Hill's sister, whom I will speak with in just a moment, says her brother stayed in Ukraine because he refused to leave his sick partner's bedside. Chernihiv has seen some of the worst devastation so far in this war. This new satellite image shows multiple fires burning in the city. You can see that. It's just, look at that. It's leveled. It's a landscape of total destruction. The extent of the damage in there and other cities of Ukraine just now becoming clear with these new satellite images. I'm going to show you in the south, in the Donetsk region. Look at those homes and buildings in Volnovakha before the invasion. See that? That's before. Let me show you after. Yeah, gone. Ruslan Osipenko is the chief of police for the Donetsk region. And tonight, he gave us this report for you on what he is seeing there on the ground. Here he is.
We have documented a large number of war crimes by the Russian army. The artillery shelling of civilian areas is occurring everywhere across the Donetsk region.
And tonight, another member of the Biden administration calling the killing war crimes after President Biden called Putin a war criminal yesterday. Today, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said this.
Personally, I agree. Intentionally targeting civilians is a war crime. After all the destruction of the past 3 weeks, I find it difficult to conclude that the Russians are doing otherwise.
And tonight, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky invoking the Holocaust in his speech, pleading for help from Germany's parliament.
Every year, politicians say never again. Now, I see that these words are worthless. In Europe, a people is being destroyed.
Fred Pleiken is out front in Ukraine tonight in Lviv. And Fred, civilians are continuing to suffer so terribly under the Russian assault. I know you spoke with the mayor of Chernihiv earlier today, where we are seeing all this death, the morgue overwhelmed today with those bodies. And he talked to you about these indiscriminate attacks. What else did you learn?
Well, Erin, it's in Chernihiv and it's in so many other regions here in this country as well. If you look at, for instance, Mariupol, Kharkiv, Kiev also, where so much of the civilian infrastructure is now being taken under fire. And, the mayor of Chernihiv, he said, look, these areas that are getting hit, those are not military areas. They're civilian areas. It's not only buildings. It's also a lot of infrastructure that civilians need that are simply being ground down. And it's really something that's continuing and getting worse as times go on. Here's what we're learning.
As Vladimir Putin's military rains bombs, rockets, and artillery on Ukraine, civilians are paying the highest price. Scores killed and maimed. In Chernihiv, north of Kiev, rescue workers dig out the bodies of an entire family killed when a residential building was hit. Dozens more civilians lost their lives in attacks. The Ukrainian government now confirming that U.S. citizen James Whitney Hill was among those killed. I asked Chernihiv's mayor to tell me about the situation in his city.
The intensity of the shelling has increased. It's been indiscriminate, apparently random. We're not talking about certain military infrastructure buildings being bombed. In reality, houses are being destroyed. Schools and kindergartens are being destroyed.
This graphic video shows the gruesome aftermath of an attack on people waiting in a bread line in the same town. Witnesses say at least 10 civilians were killed. Russia's military cynically claiming it wasn't them.
All units of the Russian armed forces are outside Chernihiv, blocking the roads, and no offensive actions are being taken against the city.
Other cities are getting shelled as well. One of the hardest hit, Mariupol in the southeast. Several were killed and wounded, mostly women and children, when a maternity ward and children's hospital were hit last week. And then the main theater, where the U.S. believes hundreds of people had taken shelter, was bombed. A small miracle, the bomb shelter under the building held up, helping some of those inside survive, though it's still unclear how many. Authorities say efforts to pull people from the rubble are being hindered by the total breakdown of public services and the threat of further Russian attacks. Aerial images show the building was clearly marked as having children inside, leaving Ukraine's defense minister irate.
You can see from the maps, from the drones that are around this theatre, big letters of children were written so that the pilot of the plane which was throwing the bombs could see. And still, in spite of that, this monster has bombed the theatre.
Russia has denied it was responsible for the attack, and the Russians claim they only target military installations, sending out this video of them allegedly destroying Ukrainian howitzers. But the UK's defense ministry says the Russians are increasingly hitting cities with heavy and less accurate weapons because they're simply running out of precise munitions as the war drags on. Experts believe it will only get worse.
They're very intentionally targeting water stations and power supplies and internet towers and cell phone towers and that sort of thing in a very deliberate attempt to make it more difficult for the defenders to hold out and try and force them to capitulate.
But despite bringing massive firepower on civilian areas, the U.S. and its allies say Russia's offensive in Ukraine has stalled and recent territorial gains have been minimal.
And Aaron, experts call this a page out of the Syria playbook. Of course, in Syria also, what the Russians did in a lot of places is they besieged cities, they tried to bomb the populations there into submission. But the experts also say so far for Russia, it doesn't seem to be working. There's a lot of death, there's a lot of destruction, but so far for the Russians, very little in the way of military gains. Aaron?
All right, Fred, thank you very much. And as I mentioned, an American, James Hill, now one of Putin's victims as well in those assaults that Fred is reporting on. Camila Bernal has more.
Bombing has intensified. No way out. That was the last post from American James Hill before confirmation of his death. His Facebook detailing a chilling account of his last days in Ukraine. Intense bombing. Still alive. Limited food. Room very cold. According to his family, Hill was waiting in a breadline with several other people when they were gunned down by Russian military snipers. His body was found in the street by the local police. Hill was in Chernihiv with his partner Ira, who's Ukrainian and battling MS. "We're hanging in there," he wrote on Monday. "Very cold inside. Food portions are reduced. Bombing and explosions most of the night. Hard to sleep. People getting depressed." In his post, he describes feeling helpless, hungry, and cold while narrating a war. Intense bombing last night for 2 hours. It was close to hospital. Machine gun fire could be heard. It stopped just after midnight. Hill even encouraging political action, posting this on March 7th. "For my American friends and relatives, please pressure your local representatives to expedite American visas for Ukrainians, especially for families with children and skilled workers." And Aaron, while he wanted to help others, wanted to get out, it was too late. His friends are now describing Jimmy as someone who was wonderful, who was caring, who really cared for others, and who liked the outdoors, liked fly fishing. He kept in touch with some of these friends via Facebook, some of them saying they were able to essentially say goodbye. Now that Facebook is filled with condolences, people honoring and remembering a father, a brother, and just a brave man. Aaron.
All right, Camila, thank you very much. And now up front now is James Hill's sister, Katya Hill. And Katya, thank you. I'm so sorry. You start just by saying how sorry I am for your loss, as horrible and unexpected and unwarranted as it is. In those last Facebook posts from your brother, he said it was cold and food was limited, and obviously he had gone out, it appears, to try to get food, to be in that line. What do you know about what happened to your brother?
We don't have confirmation from the embassy or this department specific to his death, but I do know as things were deteriorating in the city and the food at the hospital, my brother was the one that was going out to the store to bring back what food he could find. And his sharing with me on Messenger was how patient the Ukrainian people were, waiting in line of maybe 100 people and just taking what they need and leaving food and other supplies in the store for the rest in the line. And at one point, a missile went by him and landed at a distance that did not hurt the people in the line. Wow. So my brother was the helper that people find in a crisis. At one point, he said he was in the store. He bought some cookies so that he could bring cookies back to the nurses that were helping and couldn't get out to the store. And he had a stash of chocolate that he was keeping so that he could hand out chocolates when somebody was being depressed or, just needed a little encouragement.
What a kind, incredible person. Now, you talk about nurses, and I know that Jimmy had talked about his partner, at least on Facebook we saw, and I know, of course, you know her, but that she was in intensive care. She was sick with MS, and I understand, Katya, that he had stayed in Ukraine because he wanted to take care of her, that moving for her obviously was not possible. Was it a hard decision for him?
Well, in a sense, no, because he was not going to leave Ira's side in her condition. And Jim was in Ukraine this time because he had gotten medicine from the United States and had found the doctor in Chernihiv that would treat her. And so he arranged for an ambulance to transport Ira and her mother, along with him, to the hospital so she could get that treatment. And that was the Monday before the invasion started. And when she was admitted to the hospital, the doctor thought she had a mild case of pneumonia and said, well, let's treat the pneumonia first and then start the MS treatments. And of course, in 2 days, the invasion started. But he was not going to leave.
He wanted to take care of her. Have you been able to connect with her? I mean, obviously, I understand that no, not at all.
I don't speak Ukrainian. Ira's mother had 2 phone numbers, and so we had a group that helped with Ira's care and respite for her mother. We're trying to reach her, but the last that I spoke with my brother, the electricity was out. There was no heat. Ira was transported to taken to the ICU a few days ago because it had been so cold in the hospital for so many days. But the phones, my brother said he was reserving battery on his phone because they couldn't charge them. And I can only assume that Ira's mother's phone is, unable to be charged at this point.
So, we hear these, you tell these stories about your brother and that, he would, just take enough food as was needed and take some to share with the nurses and to help others. We see that on his Facebook page where friends are posting, you will never be forgotten and you're a hero, a true humanitarian, capturing that part of him that you are sharing with us. One saying he was a wonderful man with a big heart. So clearly this is who he was. Katya, it's got to be so hard as your brother. Are you going to be able, do you have any sense as to where he is? Are you going to be able to bury him? Are you going to be able to handle the goodbye at all, or no?
Well, actually, that's the one thing that we're still trying to reach out to. I know Senator Klobuchar, and then I'm in Pittsburgh, so Senator Casey's office. We don't know where my brother's body is. So that kind of closure the family won't have right now. So any help that somebody can let us know on that would be greatly appreciated.
Well, I hope someone, go ahead.
Yeah, prayer services. I mean, my son is a Orthodox priest, so he will do what's called a panachida, or a prayer service for my brother at his parish in New Jersey, and my parish here will do a prayer service. But for finalizing, that will be probably our hardest.
Yeah.
What can I say? The hardest thing that we're going to have to go through is not having that kind of closure.
Katja, I am truly so very sorry for your loss of your beloved brother.
Thank you, Erin.
I hope that someone watching may know where he is.
He was my little brother, and I remember growing up, and he pestered me a lot. And my mother would say, "Now I didn't see him do it, so it doesn't count." But I would go back for those moments anytime.
May those memories be the blessing that you have as you move forward in life without him. Katja, I'm so sorry, and thank you.
Thank you, Erin, very much.
And next, Arnold Schwarzenegger has a message for those Russian troops.
Those in power in the Kremlin started this war. This is not the Russian people's war.
It was a powerful statement and story. Plus, she was the girlfriend of an oligarch once dubbed Putin's banker. She had 3 children with him. She was in the room with Putin, and she's out front tonight. And the youngest victims, physically injured by the savage cruelty in this war, witnesses to things that no human, no child should ever see. Thousands of Russian troops have been killed in Ukraine. Russia is struggling to replace them. This is according to the latest analysis from U.S. and NATO officials who report sagging morale among Russian troops. The NSA tonight saying that the death toll is much higher than anything that has been reported. And it comes as Secretary of State Antony Blinken issued a grim warning that Russia could escalate its war in Ukraine, partially as a result of those unexpected losses, in a devastating way.
We believe that Moscow may be setting the stage to use a chemical weapon and then falsely blame Ukraine to justify escalating its attacks on the Ukrainian people.
Out front now, retired U.S. Army Brigadier General Mark Kimmett and Rob Lee, senior fellow in the Foreign Policy Research Institute's Eurasia program and an expert on the Russian military who tracks what they are doing on the ground. So, Rob, in light of this headline about the sagging morale because the losses are higher than Putin had expected and they're struggling to replace them, you have been tracking day in and day out losses among Russian troops. What stands out to you now?
So, the figures, it's hard to know exactly how much they've lost because obviously any estimate is going to be very inexact right now. But we know that after the first week of this war, Russia lost more soldiers than it did during the war in Georgia, than it did in Ukraine in 2014, 2015, and it has in Syria over the last 7 years. All of that combined. So it's a really significant loss. And in particular, we're seeing really heavy losses in Russia's elite units. So the VDV, the airborne forces, Spetsnaz, other kind of elite formations that, these casualties are very difficult to reconstitute or to sustain.
Because these are the elite units. These are highly trained people and hard to replace. So, General Kimmett, it comes in the context of Antony Blinken saying that because of this, there could be an escalation. Whether that escalation is chemical or some sort of tactical nuclear is where the conversation then occurs. And to that front, Putin's closest ally, the Belarusian president Alexander Lukashenko, made a nuclear threat while doing an interview with a Japanese television channel today, which is highly relevant. Let me play it.
Russia will not lose in this war. You are 100% convinced of this too. How the war ends, if one of the parties wins, Japan knows better than I do.
I mean, to a Japanese television station, General, obviously a threat referencing Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Do you take this seriously?
I think that anybody that doesn't take it seriously should relook at what we've seen over the past couple of weeks. Every assumption about what Putin wouldn't do, he's done. So I think we need to take it seriously. But personally, I think he will ramp up at the conventional level before he moves on to chemical and nuclear. Yes, he's lost a lot of troops, but historically, that's not a big number. They used to lose 12,000 in a day during World War II. But I think what he's just going to do is replace those soldiers with more soldiers and double down on the artillery and rocket strikes to keep the mission going.
So on that front, Rob, doubling down on artillery strikes, rocket strikes, Human Rights Watch says Russian forces attacked residential areas in Mykolaiv with cluster munition rockets in 3 separate attacks in the last week. Those are widely condemned weapons. Now, you also have been tracking what weapons the Russians are using, where, and what weapons are being destroyed. What are you seeing now there?
Sure. So, earlier in the conflict, we saw plenty of evidence of cluster munitions being used in Kharkiv, where the really heaviest bombardment's been occurring. It includes Smerch, Uragan, multiple launch rocket systems, aviation bombs that can also dispense cluster munitions. So it's pretty clear it's a theme that we've already seen before. What's happening in Mykolaiv, we already saw that in Kharkiv. The issue is that Mykolaiv is a really important city, and that if Russia wants to get to Odessa, they really need to take that city. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult to make it to Odessa. So it's become this kind of strategic problem for Russia, and part of it is limiting their advance.
So, General Commit, Arnold Schwarzenegger put out a video today. And, I think it captured a lot of people's attention. It was very well done. It talked about how his father was broken both physically and mentally by the siege of Leningrad. And he talks about how angry his father was when Arnold, as a teenager, heroized a Russian weightlifter. And the context of this story was for Arnold Schwarzenegger to share his admiration for Russians and try to break through to them with the truth about the war and Putin. So here's part of it when he actually addressed the Russian soldiers that we're talking about in this conversation. Here he is.
I don't want you to be broken like my father. This is not the war to defend Russia that your grandfathers or your great-grandfathers fought. This is an illegal war. Your lives, your limbs, your futures are being sacrificed for a senseless war condemned by the entire world.
General, will something like that break through to any of its intended audience?
If it gets through is the first question. We used to talk about the great Chinese firewall, but if you take a look what's happening in Russia right now, we're starting to see the great Russian firewall. If that can get through that firewall and talking to troops, I think it would have an effect. As important, it might have an effect on public reaction to what's happening. I'm just afraid that while it's well intended, it'll never get through Putin's firewall.
Yeah, that, of course, is the big question. General and Rob, thank you both very much for your expertise and thoughts tonight.